곧 4시 10분부터 다음 세션이 시작될 예정입니다.
4:10, we will begin session 3-1. I would like to ask all participants to come inside the event hall and take a seat.
그럼 지금부터 3-1 세션을
We will now
시작하도록
begin session
하겠습니다.
3-1.
3-1 세션은 기획 세션 담대한
The title
구상이라는
of session
주제로
3-1 is
발제와
the
패널
Audacious
토크가 이루어질
Initiative.
예정입니다.
We will have the chance to listen to a presentation as well as panel discussion. Mr. Lee Suk, Senior Fellow and Director of Office for North Korean Economic Studies at the Korean Development Institute, will moderate this session. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to KGFP 2022, hosted by the Ministry of Unification of the Republic of Korea. Mr. Lee Suk, who is our moderator, is going to be a bit late due to his busy schedule. So we will go ahead without him and he will join us when he arrives. So until he arrives, I will moderate. I will also introduce the panelists for today. Now, next to me is Mr. Scott SNYDER, Senior Fellow for Korean Studies at Council on Foreign Relations. Please welcome him with a big round of applause. Next to him is Mr. Eric BALLBACH, Korea Foundation Fellow at German Institute for International Security Affairs. Next, Professor Chaesung at Seoul National University. And next to him is Mr. Eul-Chul, Associate Professor at Kyungnam University. Thank you for coming to this session once again. And I am the presenter for this session, so I would like to give a brief presentation on the Audacious Initiative. So I did give you a short material regarding my presentation, so please take a look as I make my presentation. So as you know, during his congratulatory speech on National Liberation Day on August 15th, President Yoon declared the Audacious Initiative and asked North Korea to respond. So it is not a one-off proposal, but the Audacious Initiative is the framework or the backbone of the Yoon administration's policy for North Korea. So allow me to elaborate. So I'd like to first go over the judgment that we made with regards to the political landscape which led to the Audacious Initiative. As you well know, the Audacious Initiative has risen in a time when that fight for hegemony is intensifying among the US, China, and Russia. And we envisioned that the political landscape in the region will become more complex going forward. And the arms race is becoming more intensified, and therefore there are risks of random conflicts or unexpected conflicts arising. And one of the biggest challenges facing Korea is that we must manage the division of the peninsula in a stable manner so as to create a peaceful and prosperous Korean peninsula. So hostile attitude against each other would have to be converted into one that embraces co-prosperity. And this is directly linked to the survival of both South and North Korea. So the Audacious Initiative was created amid this political situation. So it proposes that South and North Korea work together to create a denuclearized, peaceful, and prosperous Korean peninsula. Now I would like to go into the contents of the Audacious Initiative. So in response to North Korea's measures to denuclearize, we will provide corresponding measures in economy, politics, and military. So it is after we reach a comprehensive agreement on denuclearization, we will carry out what has been agreed in phases and also simultaneously. Some people say that the Audacious Initiative is another denuclearization first policy, but that is not the case. We will carry this on in stages and also carry out denuclearization process and assistance simultaneously. And this has two stages: practical denuclearization and full or complete denuclearization. And before that, and it also includes initial measures even before the practical or complete denuclearization. So during the initial negotiation process, we will preemptively take measures to provide economic support to maintain the momentum of the talks and build trust so as to facilitate denuclearization. And as the initial measure, now if you look at the materials in front of you, we will execute the resources food exchange program and also conduct pilot projects for cooperation in public welfare. As for the RFEP, North Korea's export of underground resources is limited by sanctions, but we would allow the export to some extent under the condition that North Korea takes the money or the profit from the exportation to purchase food, fertilizers, medical supplies, and other humanitarian goods. And the pilot project for cooperation in public welfare includes areas like healthcare and medicine, drinking water and sanitation, forestry, and agriculture. In the initial negotiation process, we will preemptively provide economic assistance to North Korea, and at the same time, we will work on reaching a comprehensive agreement with North Korea. And this comprehensive agreement was emphasized in the SAGE dialogue this morning. But the comprehensive agreement would include a definition of denuclearization as end state and denuclearization measures at each step and corresponding measures. And once we reach a comprehensive agreement, we will enter into the stage of denuclearization. We have, once again, practical denuclearization and complete denuclearization. And in those two stages, our assistance and North Korea's progress for denuclearization would take place simultaneously. So there would be not only economic but also political, military assistance as well. And in terms of economic assistance, we have 5 projects in mind: implementing food programs, providing infrastructure assistance, and so on. Specifics of those projects are, once again, in the materials in front of you. Now, with regards to corresponding measures in terms of politics and military, we have 3 aspects. One is the peace regime, second is military task, third is U.S.-North Korea relations. With regards to peace regime, in the practical and complete denuclearization stages, we will establish a peace regime and make sure that that takes root. And with regards to military tensions, we will make sure that we will be able to alleviate military tensions on the peninsula. And the third stage, with regards to U.S.-North Korea relations, we seek to normalize such bilateral relations. So, during a press conference on August 17th, President Yoon mentioned diplomatic assistance and also military discussions on conventional weapons. And there is a key characteristics of the Audacious Initiative that differentiates this initiative from the Vision 3000, denuclearization and opening. There are 3 big characteristics. First is that the Audacious Initiative involves bold initial measures or initial actions. And thus, this differentiates the initiatives from Vision 3000. As I said earlier, even from the initial negotiation process, we will engage in pilot project for public welfare cooperation and also food exchange programs. So these are indeed very bold measures. And second, the Audacious initiative is an integrated initiative that encompasses everything. What we mean by integrated initiative is that our corresponding measures include not only economic measures, but also political and military measures. And thus it is an integrated initiative. And thus the initiative is different from Vision 3000, which focused on economic areas. Third characteristics is that South Korea will take the central role or play a leading role in carrying out this initiative. When we see the denuclearization proposals and initiatives of previous governments, the denuclearization issue was handled between the United States and North Korea, but the Audacious initiative proposes that South Korea secures the central role in pursuing denuclearization. With regards to the Audacious initiative, as you know, North Korea made a statement on August 19th saying that the Audacious initiative is just a remake or a copy of Vision 3000. It denounced the initiative and rejected it. Kim Jong-un on July 27th in his speech continued his hardline stance against South Korea. And in other speeches and remarks in North Korea, we still see that North Korea adheres to its hardline stance, and some people evaluate that Kim Yo-jong's response towards the Audacious initiative is just a continuation of that. We have already expected such response from North Korea. But we hope that North Korea would ponder over this proposal and come back with a positive response. In 2019, the Hanoi summit was held with no fruitful outcomes. And the U.S. and North Korea relations have been stalled for the past 3 years. So taking the Audacious initiative as an opportunity, we hope to resume dialogue between U.S. and North Korea with regards to denuclearization. Going forward, the South Korean government will create environment that would allow North Korea to accept the Audacious initiative, and we will cooperate closely with the international community to this end. With the U.S., we have already agreed with the U.S. about the goal and visions of the Audacious initiative, but we will have to coordinate on the specifics of the plan. And with regards to China, we will continue on consulting with China so as to gain its support for the initiative. And we will continue to deliver the message to North Korea that the door for dialogue is opened. And so we will induce North Korea to come back to the denuclearization talks table. So we talked about 3D before. First is deterrence. Second is dissuasion, to give up North Korea's nuclear program, and third is dialogue. So this 3D is very important. So deterring, dissuading North Korea, and inducing them back to dialogue is what we will do going forward. And within Korea, we will cooperate closely with related ministries so as to concretize these main projects within the initiation. Once North Korea responds, we will make sure that we can immediately engage in dialogue and consultation. Going forward, the Ministry of Unification will consistently pursue its efforts to create a peaceful and prosperous Korean peninsula. And we would like to collect the opinions of our panelists and the attendees here today and incorporate that into our audacious initiative so as to create a denuclearized, peaceful, and prosperous Korean peninsula. That concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
제가 발제를 마쳤는데 마침 이제 사장이신 KDI 이석 박사님.
So by the end of my presentation, Dr. Lee Seok from KDI has arrived. So please welcome Doctor with a big hand. We'll be moderating today's session.
네, 여러분 반갑습니다.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Lee Seok from KDI. I'd like to apologize for being late because of the traffic. So today, during the discussion, we're going to focus on the audacious initiative presented by the Korean government and also take stock of the situation and look towards the future.
지금 이주태 국장님께서
So Mr. Lee Jootae has given a very insightful presentation.
일단 이번 세션의 발표와 패널 맡으신 여러 선생님들을 간단하게
So I would like to introduce to you the presenters. Actually, the introduction
패널 여러분들의 이야기를
has been already finished. So now we will listen to the panelists. First of all, Mr. Scott SNYDER, Senior Fellow for Korean Studies at Council on Foreign Relations.
Okay, well, I want to thank the organizers and the Ministry of Unification for putting this together and for inviting me to participate. And I think that we have, the main theme of today, I think, actually has been the Audacious Initiative and has been the Minister of Unification's presentation and in various other panels. I think that we've gotten, some idea of where the South Korean government would like to go. And also, Deputy Minister Lee, just presented some additional views and information relating to the Audacious Initiative. I learned from his presentation, and also he presented the Audacious Initiative in such an articulate and friendly manner. I mean, who could refuse? And yet we see that the North Koreans' initial response has been negative. And in my view, this is not necessarily very surprising, especially because we're talking about a North Korean public response to a South Korean public proposal. And so that means that they are responding to something that they really don't have full information on yet. And so the initial response is probably going to be negative. And so one of the challenges, I think, is how does one establish an effective communication channel by which to give the North Koreans full information and opportunity to evaluate the proposal. And I'm sure that the Unification Ministry and other parts of the South Korean government are working hard to try to convey that kind of information to the North Korean side. And I also have to say that listening to Deputy Minister Lee's presentation, it reminded me, at least in structure, a lot of the way in which the efforts to engage with North Korea under the six-party talks was structured, in that he presented a comprehensive and phased and step-by-step approach that linked denuclearization to other kinds of benefits. And so in that sense, the structure is familiar. The biggest problems, I think, are that the question of whether or not the North Koreans feel that they have moved on from that kind of structure. And that given where they are in their own nuclear modernization, is that the kind of approach that they're willing to pursue. And so I basically have identified 3 areas where I think the North Koreans, or reasons why the North Koreans might reject the proposal. One of them is related to the linkage of economic benefits to security requests for concessions on the security side. And I think that Deputy Minister Lee tried to suggest that the Audacious initiative is under some kind of evolution in that area. And so that could be an area where maybe the North Koreans could possibly reconsider. A second area, I think, is more complicated, and that is I fear that in the initial presentation of the Audacious initiative, that the North Koreans may have read it as an absorption initiative. In other words, it was too audacious for the North Koreans because it suggested too many ways in which North Korea might receive help from South Korea. And many of those, in many of those areas, they may be areas where where North Korea could be very sensitive about the possibility of having excessive dependency on an outside source. And so that is going to require a little bit more work. I think it's going to maybe require an indication of a need to go a lot slower and step by step in terms of engagement with the North Koreans. In other words, the North Koreans are likely to want to set their own pace. And the third one is really the fact that the North Koreans have already rejected the premise upon which the plan is based. And that is that they're actually rejecting the idea of conditions under which they would pursue denuclearization. And I think the way that Kim Yo-jong expressed that rejection was, no one bargains its destiny for corn cake. And so that, I think, is actually the biggest challenge that has to be addressed in some form. And that is the North Koreans simply feel that their nuclear program is a non-negotiable item as they look to the outside world. And so in that respect, the way I'm thinking about North Korea under current circumstances and in the current context is that North Korea is really almost like the turtle who has completely pulled in underneath its shell. And for a turtle to be able to move in the right direction, first it has to come out of its shell, and then it has to actually be guided in the direction that it needs to go in order to cross the finish line. If we were thinking about some kind of, movement in a particular direction. And so I guess that my advice is that we need to think more about how to get North Korea to come out of its shell in the initial phase before we're going to be able to get the turtle to move forward. And then the question is, what is the combination of elements that would be required in order to get the turtle to actually move in the direction that we desire, in the direction of denuclearization. And we can talk further about what that might look like, but I think I've used up the time that I have, and so I'll stop here. Thank you.
네, 스코스라이더 박사님.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder, for your comment.
우리의 중대한 우상과 관련해서
You talked about our audacious initiative, that there are 3 aspects for North Korea to make a judgment on that.
이러한 담대한 구상의 북한이 호응해서 나올 수 있는
And
그러한 어떤 유인
in order to engage North Korea, we also have to think about what kind of incentives that we can give to North Korea so that it can come out from the shell of the turtle.
Next, I'd like to ask Mr. Eul-Chul for his opinions.
Thank you very much for having me and for giving me the opportunity to discuss what I have in mind about the Audacious initiative. Scott SNYDER already talked about the challenges South Korea will most likely face with regard to North Korea, and he finished basically with the question of how can we bring North Korea out of its shell. And this is where I want to pick up from a European perspective, because I think in discussing the Audacious initiative, we also have to address the role of third parties, also secondary powers, or however we want to call it. And here, of course, in the past, if we take a look in the past, we see that Europe has played a role in this regard. Last time in 2000, during the deadlock in 2017, we can remember that it was European think tanks, European institutions, and individual EU member states that have acted as facilitators to bring North Korea back to the table and, so to say, set the stage for the primary powers of the conflict. It was 2017 in Oslo that the Trump administration and North Korea had their first semi-official contacts on the sidelines of a DREC 1.5 conference there. It was the first time at that time that the Otto Warmbier case was directly discussed between the US and North Korea, which then, of course, was basically moved to the New York channel to discuss further. In 2019, both working level dialogues were organized by the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, also with the involvement of the Swedish think tank SIPRI. Was the first face-to-face meeting between then Special Representative Steve Biegun and now the now North Korean Foreign Minister Chaesung. He was on the sidelines also of a so-called DREC 1.5 conference, which was, of course, much closer to an official DREC 1 meeting. So is there a possibility nowadays that Europe could once again act as a facilitator and bring North Korea, as you said, out of its shell and bring it back to the table, to the negotiation table? I think this will be very difficult as we are facing a difficult moment in time in Europe. The context, the political context has changed dramatically compared to 2017, 18, 19. It is true that individual European institutions still remain in contact with North Korean institutions, mostly from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but on a much more limited scale compared to before the global COVID-19 pandemic. So what about the official level? In late 2021, DCOR, the European Parliament delegation for relations with the Korean Peninsula, proposed to the North Koreans to hold some kind of video format, video talks with North Korean diplomats. A similar proposal was made by the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs earlier this year. But these and other proposals by individual EU member states have thus far been rejected by the North Korean side, interestingly enough, while at the same time complaining about a lack of dialogue. While such proposals, of course, reflect the basic willingness of individual European actors to re-engage North Korea, we have to be honest enough to state that neither the European Union nor its member states, nor academic institutions currently give the North Korea issue a particularly high priority, unfortunately. Of course, this is hardly surprising in view of the reorganization of the European security order at the moment. The war, Russia's war against the Ukraine almost completely occupies the political attention of the EU and its member states. However, we have heard that North Korea currently considers, at least it's considering on a very selective basis, to invite individual officials from external countries, but it is not yet clear if and when this will happen exactly. So what to do? I think in order to carry out the plan, the Yoon Suk-yeol administration needs to recalibrate the Audacious initiative on a broader scale with the participation of other neighboring countries as well as secondary powers, use the strength of its allies. So far, I think the initiative has not garnered much attention in Europe. I think also not even in the US. Of course, it's a new proposal. But I think the context, of course, it's very different, and as long as Russia and China seek to construct some form of anti-US coalition, the initiative will be very difficult to implement. So as such, I think the administration should use the time to work towards, on the one hand, a greater domestic consensus, which will be absolutely crucial, but also prepare for alternative visions and discuss these alternatives also with both the primary and the secondary powers of the conflicts. Thank you very much.
네, 박사님께서는 유럽의 그 시각과
Thank you very much, Mr. BALLBACH shared the European point of view in implementing the Audacious initiative.
말씀을 주셨습니다. 물론 발바 박사님의 말씀처럼
As he said,
입장으로 보면
given the current state, the prospect for the Audacious initiative is not so bright. Nevertheless, we would need to make efforts from a fresh new perspective. Next, we would like to hear from Professor Chaesung from Seoul National University.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much.
써서 드린 토론문이 있기는 한데
I have shared my written comments,
굉장히 앞섰었기 때문에 오늘
but I had submitted it long time ago. So I would like to elaborate more on my remarks
토론문으로 제출한 내용과
after listening to Deputy Minister's presentation as well as the remarks of the panelists.
이게 그 담대한 구상이라는 것이 어떤 문서로
So we're talking about this audacious initiative.
체계를 갖추어서 우리한테 알려지지는 않기 때문에
It's not really based on a certain document or a certain framework, and it's been 2 weeks since the announcement of the Audacious initiative. So that is why it is causing a lot of confusion and also speculation. So I think that we have to wait a little bit before how this Audacious initiative unfolds,
그 내용을 정확하게
to fully apply also the underlying intention of the author of the Audacious initiative. Now let me talk a little bit about the title. So when you hear the word Audacious initiative, you may think that it is a very experimental, risk-taking, very fresh, unprecedented initiative. But if you look at the contents of the initiative, based on what's been presented, it seems like it takes a very cautious approach rather than being very audacious or bold. So for the past 30 years, we have tried to apply a lot of approaches and methods, and there have been approaches with that have been more successful with less failure. So it seems like the Audacious initiative is about implementing those approaches which had been more successful than less successful. And Indeed, the Audacious initiative integrates a lot of the attempts that we had made in the past, so it takes a very cautious approach in that sense. And there was also a mention about economic measures. Of course, there are political and military measures put in place, but we don't know the details of that. And a lot of the stakeholders on the Korean Peninsula issue, including the United States, we need more discussions to be made with those stakeholders, and I believe that the political and military measures will be further developed going forward. So there are things that we can see and we cannot see in this audacious initiative in terms of political and military measures. And the Biden's administration goes for a calibrated practical approach vis-a-vis North Korea. But we don't really know how this is being applied in reality. We just know that that is an approach to attempt or to achieve the denuclearization of North Korea. So the title is also very important because it helps us to consistently apply the underlying principles of that initiative. So the title is important, but we also have to have a better understanding of the underlying principles of this approach or this initiative. So the first thing that we have to include in the initiative is taking stock of the current North Korea's issue by this administration. There are two things that are often said. First is the skepticism surrounding denuclearization. A lot of people are skeptical and dubious whether North Korea would really give up on its nuclear program because it's very much advanced. And this has a lot of political meaning to it. So there is a growing skepticism about denuclearization of North Korea in Korea as well as abroad. But US and South Korea officially have announced the goal for complete denuclearization. So I believe that we need to have a more in-depth dialogue. And there is also a skepticism surrounding the U.S.-China relations. The U.S.-China relations are deteriorating, and there are 3 C's. So denuclearization in the coordination and collaboration are less and less subject to negotiations, especially after the Russia and Ukrainian crisis. And even though North Korea conducts the 7th nuclear test, we believe that the additional sanctions might not be feasible. So that is why we also have to address or discuss this issue as well. And North Korea is also talking about new Cold Era in this international community. So even though there are economic sanctions because of denuclearization, and if China ultimately wins over the U.S.-China relations, that would present a lot of opportunities for North Korea, but we don't know how this is going to unfold. In any case, U.S.-China relations, current relations, are more beneficial for North Korea. So in order to overcome this situation, we need to further develop a relevant discourse. So what is of priority is to focus this discourse on how to overcome the current situation. And in the previous administrations, we had a lot of negotiations, and there was an issue of continuity and consistency of those negotiations. And rather than focusing on the difference of Yoon's initiative and President Lee Myung-bak's initiative, I think a lot of people are wondering what is the difference between this government's initiative and the previous government, the Moon's administration's initiative. So regarding peace treaty and the armistice agreement, a lot of topics were addressed during the last administration. So the population wants to know what is the difference between the previous and this one. And also, there are people who are critical of the Korea, which is not being able to sit in the driver's seat. So this is some of the issues that should be also addressed by this government so that we can ultimately present a solution that could be accepted by North Korea. So in this audacious initiative, we have to add more elements. Actually, if you delve deeper, there could be some common shared interests between the conservatives as well as the Progressive Party. And we also need to firmly act against regarding the extended deterrence. We have to make sure that the extended deterrence level of the U.S. and South Korea can actually take on the challenges presented by North Korea. So North Korea should be aware of that. And at the same time, we should be able to provide strong incentives to North Korea. When it comes to incentives, the presenter talked about 3Ds. And North Korea is very much interested about its future after giving up its nuclear weapons. And we often talk about bright future and very vague concept of economic development post-abandonment of nuclear programs. But for North Korea, they are very much interested in what would be the state of its regime after it gives up its nuclear program. So we should be able to present an audacious vision for North Korea in terms of post-denuclearization. So in addition to 3D, or in terms of 3D, we should be able to present a long-term development vision for North Korea. So that may include like building infrastructure, the ports and airports and so forth. So Ministry of Unification has long worked on this issue. So I think that to be able to present a long vision would be important. And as you may well know, U.S. also needs some sort of incentives to engage more North Korea, but they are very much boggled with their domestic affairs, and we have to make sure that we redefine the North Korea nuclear issue to be aligned also with the U.S. interests. And of course, it will not be easy to find that logic where the North Korea's nuclear issue is aligned with also the U.S.'s China policy. So we have to make sure that we develop that kind of logic to also engage U.S. more. And despite all of these efforts, we can say that it is very difficult to reinitiate negotiations with North Korea. As long as we don't show assurance in terms of security that we're not going to consider North Korea as a hostile state, it will be very difficult for North Korea to come back to the negotiating table. So, in order for North Korea to take the first step of denuclearization, we should be able to fulfill the preconditions for initiating negotiations. But that is not easy at the moment. So we have to think about how audacious our initiative should be. And the presenter mentioned about action first. But, if we tell North Korea, if you show denuclearization, commitment to denuclearization, we will provide incentive, that is not the way to go. So we have to further develop our ideas surrounding this topic. Thank you very much.
감사합니다. 전재성 교수님께서는
Thank you, Professor Jung.
알려지고 있는
So Professor Chan mentioned about how the audacious initiative that we know is very much focused on economic measures, and it is less visible in terms of political and military measures. So these are some of the focuses that we need to make going forward. We also have to take stock of the current situation in terms of denuclearization. And based on all of these efforts, we also have to think about how to dismantle this barrier for North Korea to come back to the negotiating tables. So we have to do more considerations and more reflections on how to advance the situation.
Now I would like to invite Professor Eul-Chul. The other panelists talked about international relations and politics surrounding the Audacious initiative, but I believe that Mr. Eul-Chul will be able to give us some different point of view. So I am a scholar who studied North Korean issues for a very long time. So I would like to put focus on North Korea's stance as I make my advices on how to supplement the Audacious initiative. We would like to see the Audacious initiative meet with success so as to create a peaceful and prosperous Korean peninsula. With that in mind, I would like to begin my comments. Now, if we look at propaganda messages of North Korea, I read them every day and analyze them. And people like Kyungnam, whenever they make speeches or rhetorics, I would take a look at them very closely and analyze them. North Korea's messages towards South Korea is very consistent. And North Korea's messages related to the Audacious initiative basically says that the Yoon administration does not have an understanding of the North Korean regime at all. That's the message that North Korea was trying to throw in its speech or comment with regards to Audacious initiative. So what does that mean? So we keep saying the word denuclearization. So after the Hanoi summit broke down, North Korea has changed significantly, politically, economically, socio-culturally, military aspects. Everything has changed about North Korea. But this Audacious initiative does not reflect the changes of North Korea. That's what North Korea is trying to say. For example, let's take the nuclear issues. From North Korea's point of view, being a nuclear-armed state, its strategic position of being a nuclear-armed state is crucial. North Korea says that its nuclear program is a state itself, and its nuclear program is the key ideology for advancing North Korea. North Korea faces economic difficulties and it is isolated internationally. It is one of the most obsolete nations in the world, but by becoming a nuclear-armed state, North Korea believes that it has secured a strategic position and that it has become a military superpower in the world. Political, diplomatic, and economic policies of North Korea are all based on that belief. All experts agree that North Korea will not renounce its nuclear program. And from North Korea's point of view, the strategic value that being a nuclear-armed state brings has become far greater than ever before. Yes, North Korea is facing sanctions at the moment because it possesses nuclear weapons, but by becoming a nuclear-armed state, it was able to further make the nation stronger. It was able to consolidate internal cohesion, which would become the basis for its economic development going forward. So North Korea believes that economic development should be based on its possession of nuclear program. So it is very important for us to be aware of the changes that goes on in North Korea. And North Korea held the 8th Party Congress and announced its 5-year economic development plan. And it emphasized a self-sufficiency in achieving economic development. Now, self-sufficiency, as mentioned by North Korea, means is that amid the prolonged sanctions against North Korea, it would be impossible. North Korea is basically declaring officially that it will be impossible to make North Korea denuclearized. So we have always used sanctions as strategic weapons to encourage North Korea to denuclearize, but that is not going to be the case. The value that North Korea sees in nuclear program is great, and it has declared that it will achieve economic development through self-sufficiency. These two are the pillars of North Korean regime, but we have not been able to grasp these changes in North Korea or grasp these two pillars of North Korea and just assumed that North Korea would denuclearize. Kim Yo-jong said that it is preposterous to even think that North Korea would exchange its nuclear program, which is the North Korean state regime itself, with economic assistance. So yes, these responses from the North are expected. North Korea's Rodong Shinmun articles and Kim Yo-jong's statements again send these consistent messages, and we must correctly read these messages so as to create an effective audacious initiative. That's what I want to emphasize today. Now, when we take into consideration the significant changes in North Korea, the audacious initiative indeed needs to be truly audacious. North Korea is not the North Korea that we knew a few years ago. It's a different North Korea from back in 2017, 18, and 19. So we must consider those differences. And in order to persuade North Korea and create peace on the Korean Peninsula, the audacious initiative must be truly audacious, more audacious than it is today. Now, once again, the status of being a nuclear-armed state is very important for North Korea. So are we just going to then just sit idle and do nothing? No, that's not the case. Because we cannot do that, the Yoon administration came up with the audacious initiative, and it is trying to raise the effectiveness of the initiative by trying to make many advancements and supplementation to the initiative, and I believe that should be applauded. This is the right direction to take forward, although we do have different we do see changes in the circumstances surrounding the peninsula. Now, for this audacious initiative to be audacious, is maintaining sanctions or is continuing to pressurize North Korea through sanctions really going to encourage North Korea to respond to Audacious initiative? Now, sanctions are hostile policies according to North Korea. Sanctions are the key to our hostile policies. But the problem is, I'm not trying to oppose the idea of sanctions, but we must become more sophisticated in putting pressure on North Korea through sanctions. Pressurization through sanctions provokes North Korea, I believe. The way that we've been doing it has largely provoked North Korea. Once again, North Korea is trying to achieve economic development together with its nuclear program. It's a very difficult track, but does Kim Jong-un truly believe that it will be able to achieve its goal by taking that track? I don't think he truly believes that, and he would have to find a breakthrough. But the thing is, although it is unrealizable or nearly impossible to realize it, Kim Jong-un would have to pursue economic development, nuclear development at the same time, because that is what he said, that is what he proclaimed officially. So I believe that we need to be a bit more sophisticated in putting pressures on North Korea. Once North Korea comes back to the table for talks, we said that we would provide them with corresponding measures. But to expect that North Korea would come to the negotiation tables is equal to denuclearization first, I believe. People say that's not the case. Even before taking measures for denuclearization, if North Korea comes to the table for talks, we will provide them with corresponding measures. This is what the Yoon administration argues, but I believe that the most difficult part is to induce North Korea to come to the negotiation table in the first place. So once again, the Audacious initiative needs to be more audacious in this regard. The goal and vision of the Yoon administration for the denuclearization is something that you know already, and freedom, human rights, and these universal values have been emphasized by President Yoon. Now, freedom, democracy, and human rights, yes, they are indeed important values. But when we take into consideration the inter-Korean relations and U.S.-North Korea relations, they are hostile relations at the moment. And North Korea is coming up with various measures and policies that respond to those hostile measures. And against this backdrop, emphasizing human rights, democracy, and freedom, how do you think North Korea would receive this? Is this really the effective way of approaching North Korea? Maybe we could come up with more sophisticated way to promote these universal human values rather than provoking North Korea as we are doing right now. So we must think about these points. If we look at the Kim Dae-jung administration and the Berlin Declaration of President Kim Dae-jung in 2000, and also the New Berlin Declaration by the Moon Jae-in administration in 2017, I believe that it's meaningful to compare the Audacious initiative to these two declarations. Just 3 months after the Berlin Declaration, we had the Pyongyang Summit, and also after the New Berlin Declaration in 2017, just in 8 or 9 months, the Panmunjom Summit of 2018 took place. The Berlin Declaration played a decisive role in holding summits between the two Koreas. Now, I do know that I don't have much time left, so I'm going to summarize. And also, Please take a look at President Moon Jae-in's New Berlin Declaration once again. It talks about peace, lasting, a system for lasting peace, and proposals for North Korea for civil exchanges and so on. And Deputy Minister Lee Jootae did say that the Audacious Initiative is different from previous plans or initiative, that it includes not only economic but also political and military measures. And if you look at the New Berlin Declaration, it very specifically states economic assistance to North Korea as well as regime security assurance, by mentioning that we should build a system of lasting peace on the peninsula. I do sincerely hope that the Audacious Initiative is realized, and for this to be realized, we must take into consideration the challenging circumstances that we are facing today. We must make sure that we take measures, or we propose measures that would allow North Korea to fully trust us. And does that really involve then lifting of sanctions or suspension of U.S.-Korea military drills? I don't necessarily think so. And I know that my argument for sophisticated measures might sound a bit abstract, but I do believe there is a way for us to do that. And what's most important is to persuade Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un will be the judge of the Audacious Initiative. That's the key. So perhaps if we could find ways to meet Kim Jong-un directly and persuade him, that should be included in the Audacious Initiative for it to be really audacious. Now, once again, I want to emphasize the contents within the Berlin Declaration and New Berlin Declaration. Not only should we provide military, economic, and political assistance, but we can perhaps exchange envoys or something. As you know, the Pyeongchang Olympics became an occasion for North and South Koreas to engage in dialogue again. Now, we have entered into an era of Fourth Industrial Revolution, and security and economy has become very sensitive issues. And climate change and natural disasters are really the focus of Kim Jong-un rather than the Audacious Initiative. Kim Jong-un is more interested in natural disaster problems that occur every year and how to respond to COVID-19. How can they overcome these challenges without receiving help from outside? That's the priority of Kim Jong-un. So we need to bear that in mind as we make plans for the Audacious Initiative. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Mr. Eul-Chul. You said that the Audacious Initiative of the Yoon administration must be effective. You raised questions as to how effective it may be and how audacious it may be. You raised your concerns about it, and you said that because North Korea's circumstances have changed significantly over the years, the Audacious Initiative must reflect those changes. And above all, to induce North Korea to come to the table for talks, we need to come up with more sophisticated measures, which may include sanctions, and even if it involves sanctions and promoting of universal human values, we would have to come up with more sophisticated measures for the supreme leader of North Korea to be able to ultimately accept this. So thank you for sharing your concerns with us. Now we have just heard the remarks by our four panelists, and from now on, we would like to take the remaining time for a Q&A. But before we take questions from the floor, perhaps
말씀을 좀
our
드렸는데요.
presenter, Mr. Jootae, has some remarks with regards to what the panelists said.
네 분이 다양한 말씀을 해주셨는데
The four panelists have made various remarks. I think we can summarize them into 3 to 4
우리
points.
정부가 지금 얘기하는
First,
담대한
the
구상,
audacious initiative of the current government.
실현 북한이 받아들일 수 있는 것일까? 그거에 대한
Can
어떤
North Korea really
답변을
accept
무엇일까?
this audacious initiative? We need to think about that.
이런
And number
담대한
two,
구상이 한국뿐만 아니라
the audacious initiative has to be discussed together with the United States and also the EU and the other members of the international community. And how can we cooperate with them to promote audacious initiative? And third, the current audacious initiative is focused largely on economic areas, and military and political areas fall a bit short, relatively speaking. So how can we make sure that the audacious initiative considers all those three aspects in an equal manner? And so, Mr. Jootae, if you could answer those questions, or you could do so. And I would like to, in the meantime, ask the audience to come up with any questions. Thank you very much for your valuable input and insights. I believe that this would be very helpful for the Korean government to concretize the specific plans of the initiative. And I would like to share the stance of the government with regards to what our moderator Lee-seok had said. Now, the audacious initiative includes economic corresponding measures, but not political and military measures. So I'm going to answer that first. That was the third point that he raised. I'm going to answer that first. So the Ministry of Unification is working very hard. The Yoon administration is trying to pursue a peaceful unification policy, so we are preparing documents explaining what those policies are about, and it will be released in September, and it will not only contain the audacious initiative, but the entire unification and North Korea policy of the current government. So it will include a comprehensive explanation of everything that I talked about. As said by Professor Chun Jae-sung, the political and military corresponding measures will also be included in the material. So I'd like to assure you of that. And now let's talk about how we're going to cooperate with the U.S. and other international community members. Now, Mr. SNYDER and Mr. BALLBACH also already mentioned these, but by cooperating with the United States and international community, we have to induce North Korea to come to the table for talks for denuclearization. This is not just the stance of the South Korean government, but of the international community. So we will continue to listen to the voices of the international community and reflect them in the initiative and our policies. And as said earlier, included in the audacious initiative are specific plans and measures, and close coordination is ongoing with related stakeholders. If the U.S. and the Republic of Korea can form a consensus and present that consensus to North Korea, we will be able to make the audacious initiative more effective. And Mr. Eul-Chul told us about the changes that North Korea underwent for the past few years, and that the audacious initiative does not take that into consideration about North Korea's strategy of self-sufficiency and its changed strategic status and so on. And yes, we are keeping track of the changes that occurred within North Korea and try to reflect them into the initiative. But from the eyes of the experts, that may not be enough. North Korea is securing a strategic position in the global arena and so on. is an important consideration that we ought to make. But at the same time, we have to think about the other side. So while North Korea adheres to advance its nuclear development program, we should also consider the pains and struggles felt by North Korea and also its limitations. North Korea, to the outside world, argues that it is a nuclear armed state, but if we focus too much on North Korea's external propaganda, we might fall into a trap. Now, back when inter-Korean relations was rather active, I went to North Korea, met with the authorities there. In 2000, and I visited North Korea back in 2007 and also in 2018. And within those 11 years, the North Korean authorities, I could tell that felt the pain from sanctions. So while we are aware that North Korea is determined to become self-sufficient, yes, they can say that, but the pains of the sanctions are real, and they do face limitations. That is why North Korea agreed to have a summit with the U.S. in 2018 and 2019, and that's when Kim Jong-un asked for the sanctions to be lifted or eased. Now, if you put North Korea's internal rhetorics and what North Korea has talked about and requested for in the U.S.-North Korea summit, if we combine them together, we could conclude that North Korea does face its limits. And becoming self-sufficient, Professor Eul-Chul talked about the Berlin Declaration and the new Berlin Declaration made by President Kim Dae-jung and Moon Jae-in respectively. But as you know, President Kim Dae-jung and President Moon Jae-in, when they made those proposals, the response from North Korea was precisely the same way that North Korea reacted to the Audacious Initiative. So once again, the initial response from North Korea has always been rejection. They have never, from the onset, said, "Oh, South Korea's proposal is wonderful." So we will, with patience and consistency, make these proposals to North Korea to induce North Korea to come to the table for talks. Yes, there are many times during Lee Myung-bak administration and during Park Geun-hye administration, North Korea resisted the proposals of the government, but you know the outcome. They eventually came to the table for talks. So if North Korea feels a need, then it comes to the table for talks. We should not be too obsessed about inducing North Korea, but we should just take a firm stance. And under the 3D principle, we should take a firm stance, and we could make related efforts. And when comparing the Audacious Initiative, he compared the Audacious Initiative to past initiatives. And the Audacious Initiative should not be compared to Vision 3000, but the declaration or the plans of the Moon Jae-in administration. Yes, we agree with you, but the reason why we compare the Audacious Initiative to Vision 3000 is because North Korea argued that it is a copy of Vision 3000. The most important difference between the Audacious Initiative and its previous government's plans is the Korea-U.S. relations. The Korea-U.S. relations has never been more solid. So the Audacious Initiative of South Korea is not just that of South Korea, but we actually consulted this with the United States, and the consultation is ongoing. And the impact of the Audacious Initiative will be starkly different from other initiatives made by the previous governments without the consultation with the United States. That's a big difference. And we believe that we will be able to invite North Korea to come to the table. And Minister Kwon Young said that he evaluated the past progressive and also conservative parties, that the past conservative parties were tight with making promises with North Korea, while the past progressive parties did make many promises but lacked the capacity to fulfill those promises. That they lacked the capacity to fulfill the promises means that the Korean government alone did not have the capability to fulfill the promises. Only when we work together with the international community and promote universal values together will we be able to have greater capacity to carry out the promises. So we have enough capacity. We would have enough capacity going forward to fulfill the Audacious initiative, I believe. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for your convincing words. And I find two topics interesting. So from North Korea's perspective, whenever we present proposals,
whenever we come up with proposals, North Korea would first reject it, but later eventually comes to the table for talks. That's what you said. So even though North Korea shows a negative stance towards the initiative now, you said that the ministry and the Korean government will firmly take a firm stance and make continued proposal with consistency to North Korea. And you also said that the strong U.S.-Korea alliance is a one big differentiator of the initiative. The collaboration with the international community would allow the Audacious initiative to have more leveraging power. And we will take questions and comments from the floor later, but there's one question that I'd like to raise. The current government say that so does the current government have any plans in mind to make joint proposals to North Korea? Do you have a specific item in mind at the moment? Maybe Mr. SNYDER and Mr. BALLBACH and other people from abroad might have some advice to give to us with regards to this issue. How can the U.S. and Korea together respond to North Korea and make proposal to North Korea? Do you have any tips? Well, first of all, I'd like to ask Mr. Jootae to respond on this comment. Well, I'm not sure if I can say that yes, the U.S. and Korea will make joint proposals to North Korea at this time. But as you know already, in the 1990s, Korea and the U.S. jointly proposed a four-party talks. And North Korea hesitated. So we had a briefing session, and North Korea attended that briefing session, and the four-party talks was realized. So we can refer to those past cases when formulating our policy. Is there someone from the U.S., one of our panels, Mr. SNYDER and Mr. BALLBACH, can you perhaps comment on the international collaboration?
Well, one of the obstacles to the possibility of a joint proposal is the fact that North Korea has traditionally tried to split the U.S. and South Korea when it comes to these kinds of dialogues. And I think that we are in a phase where it's more likely that North Korea is going to want to talk with the United States than with South Korea under a conservative South Korean administration. Whereas normally North Korea is more interested in engaging with South Korea rather than the United States under progressive administrations. But that doesn't mean that it is not worth thinking about the possibility of a joint proposal of one sort or another in order to establish the idea that that both the U.S. and South Korea can be responsive to North Korea. And if I'm not mistaken, that idea was mentioned in some of the briefings related to the Audacious initiative. So it's worth thinking about how to do that, especially if there is a way to have some additional conversations with North Korea about the intent and outcome behind such a proposal. And so for me, I think the critical challenge here is simply getting North Korea to engage in back-channel discussions in order to be able to set the stage for the right kind of format that can lead us to some kind of progress. And so in that respect, I would say that the most important thing is really to find ways to expand or to establish more effective communication channels, really as a prerequisite to moving forward on any kind of agenda or negotiations.
네, 감사합니다. 혹시 다른 패널분들께서
Panelists would like to take the floor.
Yeah, I think opening up channels of communication will be crucial, and we should prepare for the time when North Korea comes out of its self-imposed national lockdown and isolation, because consulting between the major powers and the secondary powers to the conflicts during that time, because I think it's very difficult at the moment during this self-imposed isolation and lockdown of the North Koreans right now. But once they come out of this, we should be ready and should use all the opportunities we have in this regard. Of course, the challenge then will be that North Korea is now getting closer to Russia and China, and I think this is what we also have to think about and what we have to counter in order for opening new spaces and for dialogue and new channels of communication.
네. 네, 그러면은
Thank you very much.
뭐 한국 측에서는 이런
Does anyone from Korea have anything to add?
좀 추가로 하실 말씀 있으면
Any further comments?
Yes, Professor Chun, you mentioned about the U.S.-Korea joint response. It is important, but it is becoming increasingly more difficult. Because as for North Korea, when it was a monopolar world, a single polar world, even during the Singapore summit, things were much better. But this government, the kind of military and economic reward it can give is the economic cooperation. And this was once in the past an incentive for North Korea, but I don't know if this will hold any longer, even to this day. North Korea believes that the current international order is the world of new Cold War, and of course it very much depends on the U.S.-China relations. And North Korea may think that we're entering in a world where getting a security assurance from the U.S. no longer holds, is no longer possible or effective. So even though the trilateral coalition provides security assurance to North Korea may not be satisfied with that. And I think the second important thing is the U.S. policy. So the United States has a lot of policies vis-a-vis China. So the U.S. Korea's policy in countering the China's emergence is increasingly becoming larger. But would that also spark more interest from North Korea regarding the U.S. is another question. So would the U.S. also is involved with its domestic affairs, and it's very much keen on the Ukraine war, and also there is the Taiwanese Strait issue. So when it comes to the broader context, we have to continue to strengthen ROK-US alliance and at the same time address the nuclear issue of North Korea. So we have to take into consideration the relationship between the Audacious Initiative as well as Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. So we have this vast roadmap of diplomacy or foreign affairs policy, and we have to be able to strike a right balance between this government's Audacious Initiative and IPEF. And as the presenter said, there are some advantages related to the conservative government as well. If you look at Bolton's memoir, he says that Moon was only interested in unification and not denuclearization. But that may not be true. I think that it is wrong to be critical of Korea's commitment to unification. So we are interested both in unification and denuclearization, and we have the ability to implement both topics in parallel. So I think that even the conservative government can give the impression that the government is committed to unification as well as denuclearization. So I believe that there are some advantages related to the current conservative government. And the ROK-US alliance is growing stronger, so we have to leverage also that situation. Thank you very much. So if you have no further comments, I would like to now open it to the floor for questions or comments. We're joined by many distinguished experts, and I don't have questions yet received, but I would like to know if the participants here present have questions or comments to our panelists. If you do, please raise your hand.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the panel for a really stimulating discussion. I'm sure that everybody in the audience has learned a great deal from your expertise. My name is David Ellis. I am the British ambassador to North Korea, so I obviously am following this debate with great interest. I wanted to pick up a point that the last speaker made. The subject of the discussion is about making the Audacious Plan effective. And we've already heard that there's been great coordination between South Korea and the United States on this. But to make it effective, what is the Yoon Suk-yeol government doing to consult China? Because as one of the speakers said earlier, North Korea has changed a great deal in the last few years. It is also fair to say that China has changed a great deal in the last few years. So are we taking full account, and do we have a full understanding of how China's changing interests in the Korean Peninsula are reflected in the Audacious Initiative? Thank you.
네, 감사합니다. 아주 귀한 말씀을 주셨네요.
Thank you very much. That was a very valuable question.
북한에 대한 대북 정책, 그런데 이제 중국이 어떻게 이것을 한반도에
So you talked about how China might be involved in ensuring effectiveness of the Audacious Initiative. Our understanding of China and and the things that we ought to consider China going forward in terms of ensuring effectiveness of the Audacious Initiative. Mr. SNYDER, do you have any comments?
Well, I think that one theme of some of the other panels that I have observed today is related to the difficulties that are imposed by the context of China-U.S. rivalry for South Korean policy and for progress with North Korea. And I think that that is a serious obstacle to moving forward, and it raises some very challenging questions about the feasibility of even a joint U.S.-South Korean plan to try to engage with North Korea, and the likelihood of success of that kind of plan. It is true that one can imagine that even if North Korea were to determine that it was prepared to engage productively in a dialogue, even a joint dialogue with the United States and South Korea on some of these kinds of issues, that there is any number of ways that an antagonistic China could make it difficult for that process to move forward, either outside of the dialogue or inside of the dialogue. And so, that is a very interesting question, I think, for us all to consider, is, whether or not there is a path forward for an improvement in the relationship with North Korea in a context where China is antagonistic. Another way of putting it is, to what extent is China's acquiescence to any sort of progress in security arrangements or new security frameworks around the peninsula possible?
네, 감사드립니다.
Thank you very much for your comment. If you don't have any further questions, now Mr. Jootae said a very interesting remark before. And it's related to what Professor Eul-Chul said. For the past few years, North Korea has undergone some significant changes, and Professor Eul-Chul was very pessimistic about North Korea coming to the table for talks, and Mr. Jootae said that while North Korea did undergo significant changes, North Korea is facing some difficult challenges at the moment, and if necessary, it can always change its stance and come to the table for talks. So there are some similarities and differences in the comments that you two made, but maybe Professor Eul-Chul can make another comment on that. This event is hosted by the Unification of Ministry, and the ministry, I'm sure, aims to raise our understanding about the Audacious Initiative through this event. So I feel very pressured right now because I feel like I'm put on the spot, because I'm not trying to refute every single remark made by Mr. Jootae. We have watched inter-Korean relations for a long time, and in the past, like Mr. Jootae said, whenever the need arose, North Korea did change its stance and came to the table for talks. But that's not the North Korea that we should expect anymore. North Korea is not going to come to the table for talks, even though it feels the needs to. Because when it comes to the table for talks, the political, military, and economic benefits that it wishes to receive has to be there in order for North Korea to come to the table for talks.
경제적 실익을 기대해서 이제 2018년에
So in 2018,
정부와 정상회담도 여러 차례 했죠.
there was the several inter-Korean summits, and yes, the summits were held, but the problem is North Korea was seeking to receive economic benefits. But
넘어서서 남북 간만에 경제 협력을 할 수가 없는 겁니다.
inter-Korean economic cooperation that is still limited by sanctions.
어떤 영향을 발휘한다고 해도
No matter what the conservative government does, inter-Korean economic cooperation is going to be limited as long as there are sanctions in place. Therefore, I believe it is nearly impossible, or there's hardly any chance for North Korea to come to the table for talks because it knows that its needs are not going to be satisfied. The UNSC resolution, the 5 resolutions that have been passed since 2017 has induced those significant changes in North Korea. Then if we continue to slap sanctions on North Korea, will North Korea come to the table for talks? We certainly hope so. But as a researcher, objectively speaking, while the Kim Jong-un government does suffer food shortages, and even if the North Korean people die from starvation, Kim Jong-un is not going to accept the conditions of South Korea and the U.S. For dialogue, because that's precisely when the North Korean regime will continue to collapse. That's what Kim Jong-un sees it. Because North Korea believes that coming to the table for talks is succumbing to South Korea and the United States, and that's going to deal a blow to Kim Jong-un's leadership. Accepting dialogue because of pressure and sanctions, that's going to be very detrimental to Kim Jong-un's leadership. And you emphasize U.S.-South Korea relations, and the bilateral relations during the Moon Jae administration was strong too. And they keep saying that the Moon administration said the bilateral alliance or relations is stronger than ever before. And it is based on that we approach North Korea. And therefore, we will be able to carry out effective plans and policies for negotiating with North Korea. That was argued by the Moon administration too. Can the Yoon administration secure autonomous capacity from the United States? In other words, can it, without the U.S., fulfill some of the promises that it makes to North Korea purely on its own? Without that, North Korea is not going to trust us.
명확한 북한에 정말 우리가 비핵화를 위해서 필요한 전략적인 신뢰 그런 걸 쌓기 위해서는
In order to build strategic trust with North Korea,
정말 지금 유지되고 있다면 북한을 움직일 수 있는 그런 카드들을 합의해갖고 북한에
so in other words, given that we are to coordinate closely with the United States with regards to our North Korea policy, we would have to clearly show to North Korea that we do have the autonomous capacity to fulfill some of our promises to North Korea, even without getting the United States involved. But everything would have to be coordinated with the United States, of course. Yes, so thank you so much for sharing all of your diverse opinions on North Korean issues. Now, I would like to hear last remark from our presenter, Mr. Eul-Chul, before we wrap up. Thank you very much. With regards to North Korea-China relations, I would like to just make a short comment. As far as I know, many people said that because North Korea is closely cooperating with China, bringing North Korea to table for talks is going to be difficult. I do agree. But we have to look at the history between North Korea and China from a wider viewpoint. Their bilateral relations is really not as intimate as we might think. North Korea does not fully trust China. I can mention some historical events. In the 1930s, there was something called 민생단 incident. And back then, North Korea was not established at the time, but the forces that represent North Korea today engage in conflict with China. And this year marks the 30th anniversary of China-Korea relations. And we still see conflict between us and China today. And there are many historical events that show us that North Korea does not feel entirely comfortable with China. So, yes, it is true that the China-North Korea policy is becoming more intimate, which we need to take into consideration when we carry out our policies, but it's not all that comfortable. So, but as the UK ambassador to North Korea said, yes, North Korea-China relations is very important. And we already consulted with the related stakeholders with regards to Audacious initiative. And what's important is that denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula and resolving the issues through conflict and stability on the Korean Peninsula are also considered important by China as well today. But I would like to clearly say that we will continue to exert our efforts to gain consensus from China going forward. And I do know that Professor Eul-Chul, as an expert in this matter, has a lot to say about this. So we appreciate his remarks and his insight, and we will reflect them into our policies. Sanctions and pressures alone are not enough to induce North Korea to come to the table for talks. We are aware of that. So we will propose incentives through audacious initiatives, and the US and Korea will speak in one voice so as to show North Korea that we're not just throwing rhetorics, but we are actually cooperating closely with each other with regards to North Korean matters. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you. Thank you for your valuable comments. So North Korea policies have changed from administration to administration. But this administration said that while its North Korea policy is audacious, it is open to make supplements to the policy by listening to opinions of various people. And what is also impressive is that it emphasizes U.S.-South Korea relations or alliance. And I would like to make one comment. For people like me, North Korea is very obstinate, it's tough, and I'm not sure if this is an appropriate expression, but it always tries to wield influence on South Korea. And the current circumstances in North Korea is very challenging. It faces economic difficulties, people are starving. And with the pandemic, there is really no clear exit for North Korea. But I do have hopes. If South Korea were to propose the audacious initiatives, rather than just rejecting it flat out, if the North Korean Supreme people truly loves, North Korean Supreme leader truly loves his people, he I wish for him to take a close look at the Audacious initiative and perhaps makes necessary supplements from his point of view and ultimately carries out this initiative for the benefit of his people. Thank you so much, everyone. That concludes today's session.
그럼 이상으로 오늘의
That
마지막
concludes
세션을
the
마치도록
last session
하겠습니다.
for today.
내일 세션은 오전 9시
Tomorrow's
반부터
session will
진행되오니
begin
많은 참여
starting from
부탁드립니다.
9:30, and we ask for your active participation. I would like to thank all attendees.